Are you looking for wisdom, courage, and guidance on your journey as a change maker? Grab your headphones, a warm drink, and possibly a notebook. You're going to want to take notes. You've found your new favorite podcast. Welcome to Become a Good Ancestor, a podcast hosted by Layla Saad. Layla is a New York Times and Sunday Times best-selling author, an international speaker, and a globally respected teacher on the topics of race, identity, leadership, personal transformation, and social change. In each episode, Layla interviews some of the world's most inspiring authors of color who are changing the world with their words. From memoirs to manifestos, poetry to pop culture, science to social justice, and everything in between. Join Layla as she dives deep with BIPOC authors who are showing us the way to healing and liberation. This is a place for people who want to help change the world, in honor of those who have come before us, and in service to those who will come after we are gone.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to what was Good Ancestor Podcast, but is now Become a Good Ancestor Podcast. I'm here with you. I'm your host, Layla Saad, and this is episode 1 of a brand new adventure. If you're wondering what happened to Good Ancestor Podcast, this is an evolution. We're on the next step of this amazing journey of deepening the work of what it means to be a good ancestor. And so we've gone through an amazing rebrand, and we're going through a relaunch of both the podcast and the book club. And you can find out all about it at our brand new website, becomeagoodancestor.com. Now, I am really excited about all the new changes, but I want to reassure you that while a lot of things may have changed, a lot has also stayed the same. One of those most important things that has stayed the same is that this podcast and our book club is still about centering and celebrating incredible authors of color who are changing the world with their words and their works. And so each month we will continue to interview an amazing BIPOC author, like the one we have for you here today, and we will also be studying their book in the Become a Good Ancestor book club. We'll close off each month with an amazing interview, an event for our members in the book club where they will get to ask the author the questions that they have about the book, about the author's journey, about the author's creative practices, and about their challenges and successes and what it means to them to be a good ancestor. Now that we've talked to you about the rebrand, we've talked to you about the important changes that have been happening, I'm so excited to introduce our very first author who's joining us on this journey. And we couldn't have chosen a more perfect person to help us kick this off. Today, I'm in conversation with the James Baldwin and Jesus Christ loving speaker and writer, Danté Stewart. Danté Stewart is an African-American speaker and writer on the intersecting topics of race, religion, and politics. He is a self-described country boy who received his BA in sociology from Clemson University and is currently studying at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Danté's debut book, Shoutin in the Fire, an American Epistle, which is published by Convergent Books, is our April 2022 book selection in the newly rebranded Become a Good Ancestor book club. To find out more about the book and to join us in the book club, visit becomeagoodancestor.com/book club. So, welcome, Danté.
Yo, what's up, Layla? How are you?
I'm good, and I'm so excited to be in conversation with you. I have a huge internet crush on your Instagram page, and so you're an incredible writer, incredible thinker and speaker, and I'm so happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be as well. Are we going to tell people the story of the previous episode?
We might tell people the story of that. But before we do, this isn't the first time Danté and I are speaking. But before we do, I want to make sure people can grab your information and they can know straight away where to find you and find out more about your work and get your books. So where can they find you online?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, dantestewart.com, or you can go to my social medias. They're all the same, @StewartDantéC. I slide in the DMs and I'll hit you back. I I usually I go through like the requests and like the like messages and whatnot, and I try and hit everybody back whenever I can. So hit me up. Look forward to meeting you.
Amazing, amazing. Now, Danté is giving you a little behind the scenes info about about something that happened a couple of months ago when we got ready to put out a new episode for the podcast at the beginning of 2021. Danté and I recorded an amazing podcast interview speaking about his book and his journey. And right as we were about to finish up this incredible conversation, my whole system shut down and we lost everything. We lost the whole conversation. And I was saying to Danté, first of all, I was mortified. And I know for podcasters, if this has happened to you, it's a really horrible experience. Another thing that happened to me years ago was I had another amazing conversation and realized at the end that I had forgotten to press record. And so it happens to the best of us.
Indeed.
But I'm one of those people that when something like that happens, I take it as an opportunity to kind of step back and think about like, okay, how might this be for the best? And what opportunities are here? And so with that, and I want to say a huge thank you to Danté because he was incredibly gracious and he was like, I'm ready whenever you want me back to record it again. This is no issue at all, which was a huge relief. Such a sweetheart.
Indeed.
But from my perspective, I was like, this is an opportunity for me to really realign and really think about what I want to put out in 2021. I knew I wanted to speak with Danté again, but I also knew that we were going through a transition. And so we took that opportunity to, as I said at the intro, to rebrand and to relaunch and to really align with the next steps in our journey. So I'm incredibly grateful not only to be speaking with Danté, but also to be having him back on again as he helps us to kind of give birth to this new launch and this new step in our journey. So thank you, Danté.
You know what? I would do it a fourth time if it came to that. I would do it a fourth time. Hopefully it don't come to a fourth time.
I believe it, honestly. But hopefully not. So let's all cross our fingers for the ride. So Danté, first question. Who are some of the ancestors, living or transitioned, familial or societal, who have influenced you on your journey?
I think the last time we talked, actually, my granddaddy was alive. I think my granddaddy actually was living. When we talked, and my granddaddy transitioned late January. And so I think when I think about ancestors and elders who have become ancestors, the first name that come to mind is my granddaddy, Johnny Ruben Albert. A few days after his funeral, I got so many stories from Granddaddy that I'm going to lean into because so much of this podcast and so much of the work that you're doing and so much of the work that we collectively want to do is at the place of our stories. And right. I think Toni Morrison beautifully writes about that and takes seriously the everyday, ordinary ways Black people create life and the power that is wrapped up in the way we live and move and have our being. So the day of my grandfather's funeral, I am back home for the repast. And then I'm sitting down talking with one of his friends, Mr. Earl, old brother, who is a few years younger than my granddaddy was. My granddaddy mid to upper 80s when he passed on. And we're sitting down and Mr. Earl says like, yo, he says, now he talks like this. He said, I carry a copy of the Constitution everywhere I go. So he has this very deep, heavy country voice about him. And he started telling me about how he carries the Constitution wherever he goes. And then he goes on to talk about these people don't know what critical race theory is. And he goes on. Yeah. He's one of those. He's one of those brothers who is very much a militant, older, elder, militant Black man. And he holds my hand and he sits me down he holds my hand as we're sitting down, and he tells me, he says, have you ever been on a cruise? And I tell him, no, Mr. Earl, I haven't been on a cruise. And he says, every time I go on a cruise, I stop. Whenever we stop, I look at the water. And I looked at him confused. I asked him why. He says, because somebody swam or drowned there to get us here. And he says, whenever you look at the water, when you look at these waters, remember, and you look at yourself, that somebody swam and somebody made it to the other side.
Wow.
And I think about my granddaddy, who is now an ancestor. I mean, there are no words that can fully capture the beautiful reality of his life. A man who was born in the 1930s, who's seen the 1950s, who was in the military, in segregated barracks, and inside of a institution that loved Black people's bodies but did not care about their citizenship.
Right.
He remembers the 1970s and the 1960s and the uprising. And when him and Mr. Earl, both of them from the same area, met, they kind of grew up in the same way and became best friends. And both of them have this visceral memory of what it meant to be Black in this country, and the estimation and the worth or the devaluing of Black life that this country has. But that's not all they contain. They contain so many of their memories and so many of their stories. And even my granddaddy, he had dementia, and late in the stages of dementia, he would repeat the same stories over and over and over again. And one day when I was talking to my mother, I was kind of complaining about it. And she simply said, that sometimes when dementia patients are repeating the same stories, all they're doing is holding on to what they remember.
Wow.
And so when I think about the ancestors that inspired me, I think about my granddaddy and Mr. Earl. As he held my hand, he said, "That is what I'm going to miss the most about your granddaddy." And he was just simply talking about us sitting there telling stories. And so first and foremost, I think my granddaddy, but then also, as people know, James Baldwin and Toni Morrison and James Cone and Katie Cannon, who sit over my shoulder every single day that I come to my office. And I'm surrounded by books on theology. I'm surrounded by books on history. I'm surrounded by books on politics. I'm surrounded by books that are fiction, that are poetry, that are narratives, that are theory, that are short story, that bend genre and dance around genre. And I look at all these books and I think what it means to sit underneath the tutelage and the eyesight and the spirit of Black theologians, womanist theologians, Black writers, who in very many ways did not receive their flowers that they deserve while they were here.
No.
And so as I think about while I remain, I want to do as best I can to let people not only know about them and hear their story, but to lean in the traditions that they have given us and have caused me to inherit. So I've been thinking a lot about inheritance. You know, what do we inherit in our vocation? What do we inherit in our stories? What do we inherit in our art? And the many ways people want to erase us and take that inheritance away from us. And I look around this study and I think about my ancestors and I realize that, you know, I have a beautifully Black inheritance. And that inheritance is my gift that I offer to myself, that I offer to my wife, that I offer to my friends, that I offer to my children, that I offer to the world. And I try and do it again and again every single day.
Oh my goodness. That was several deep breaths there because that was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for sharing about your granddaddy. And it's such an incredible reminder. We all know that we're going to die. And we talk about becoming ancestors. We talk about the ancestors, but it's always still a surprise and a shock and such a loss when it happens. But the way that you just spoke about him was so honoring and so beautiful. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Indeed.
And it's a reminder that, you know, when we are gone, the things that are remembered about us is how we were, is our essence, our presence. That's what really lingers, right, in the memory.
Oh, yeah.
So that's beautiful.
Oh yeah, you speak of essence, and it reminds me of the sermon that my uncle did, the eulogy, and he is my granddaddy's son, his oldest son, who's also a pastor. He has to eulogize his father. And he's talking and he says this line. He says, I lost my daddy years ago. He had dementia. I lost my daddy years ago. But what remained was his essence. And I thought that was brilliant, despite things that I thought was problematic about the eulogy that I walked away with, which were quite a few things. I still hold on to that about, that's just real. And I think he is very much right. And he beautifully stated that it is the essence of Granddaddy. It is how he made you feel in his presence. Maya Angelou has the quote, people will forget, what you have done, but they will never forget how you have made them feel.
That's right.
And so it is the essence of our ancestors that still dwells with us. I think it was Thich Nhat Hanh. He says that our DNA, when we look at ourselves and every fiber of our materiality is our ancestors looking at us and emanating from our lives. And I think, is that essence that when we try to read something that Toni Morrison has wrote, as I've been writing this morning, I just finished up an essay on Morrison because me and Toni Morrison, we share a birthday. If people don't know, Toni Morrison's birthday is...
When is it?
Yep, the 18th.
18th February, right? Yes. And Audrey Lorde as well.
Oh, Audrey Lorde. Audrey Lorde is born on the 18th? I did not know that.
Yeah.
Oh, I love Audrey Lorde.
Yeah.
Wow. She's born on my birthday.
It was in my calendar, actually. It was in my calendar.
Oh, my goodness.
And my daughter was like, she saw it as I use my calendar for meetings. So I had Audrey Lorde and Toni Morrison, and she's like, "You were meeting them, but I thought they were dead." And I was like, "They are. It's their birthdays."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And also my youngest brother as well. So it's
okay, that's a special day. That's a special day. And to think about the essence that whenever I read something of Toni or read something of Audrey Lorde and try to communicate in the ways that they did, whether you're talking about Toni and her eulogizing James Baldwin and talking about the language he gave, the courage he embodied, the tenderness he exhibited to so many of us, or whether you're talking about Audrey Lorde and Sister Outsider when she speaks of, the Black mother within us, the poet who tells us, who whispers in our dreams, I feel, therefore I can be free. Whenever I go to the page, whenever we go to the page, whenever we go to their books, whenever we say their name, whenever we try to live out what they tried to live out, we are indeed embodying their essence. Their spirit, as you said, still lingers. And I am incredibly, deeply grateful for that.
Shivers. Okay. Yeah. I love it. Danté, tell us a little, before we talk about your book, which is our, April selection for the book club. Tell us a little bit about your background, your upbringing, and how you came to be a writer.
Oh, that's a great question. So I am from South Carolina. I think you have a global audience, so I have to name. I am in America. I am in the South, in the Southeast. I'm from South Carolina, which is the place, historically speaking, where a lot of Black people came during the time of the transatlantic slave trade. So all my family is all up and through South Carolina. So you'll meet a lot of Black writers in general. I'm thinking about Jason Reynolds' first, I think his essay might have been first or second, one of those, in the book that Tarana Burke and Brene Brown did, entitled "You Are Your Best Thing," and he writes about South Carolina, or Robert Jones, his people. Robert Jones, his people and my daddy are from the same area, Dillon, South Carolina. Yeah. And so I'm from South Carolina. I was raised in rural South Carolina. So I'm from the rural South. I'm from the Black rural South, where so much of life was like intimate, beautiful, and insular. Where so much of the world that my granddaddy built, who built his own home, he had his own restaurant. He was very much active in the community. My whole family is just a very family oriented area. It's not a place where people, migrate to. It's a place where people kind of migrate from. And so whatever remains is kind of these vestiges of history, of culture, et cetera, et cetera. So I was raised Black Pentecostal, Black in the rural South, and raised Black Pentecostal, where so much of church service was hours long, multiple times a week. It was very expressive and evocative and emotive. And so much of who I am as a person, like you would see me if I'm preaching or if I'm writing or if I'm speaking, there's a sort of type of cadence to the way that I speak. There's a certain type of voice that I have.
Yeah.
And my wife, she jokes with me about this. She'd be like, yo, there you go, using that voice again. And I'd be like, babe, like, when I was younger, like when it's time to show up in the pulpit, you gotta show up for the moment. And so
that's right.
You gotta change some things. You gotta change the way you enunciate. And my mama loved using that word when I was a child. It's enunciation. She would always tell me, she would say, enunciate your words. And she would not let me just say certain words. So if I was saying, hey, Danté, how you doing? I'm doing good. She would always say, no, you're doing well. I'm well. And so she would always try to change my language and make sure that I use the proper grammatical structure in language. So my mom cared deeply about language, but my mother and my father, I'm the baby of four. My brother is Dion. My brothers are Paul and Dominique. I'm the baby of four. And my family, my mother and my father cared deeply about Black literature. And so my house was full of books. Our house was full of documentaries. Our house was also filled with so many artifacts. So I went home a few weeks ago, and I'll show you real quick. I'm gonna kind of lean away from the mic.
Yeah.
So this right here, listeners, you can't see this. I don't know if y'all can see this or not.
We got video and audio, so our video watchers can see it.
Cool. So this is the AfroAmerican, right? This is dated November 30th, 1963.
Wow.
The AfroAmerican was the Black newspaper. This Black newspaper is the Sunday edition in commemoration and reflection on the murder of JFK.
Wow.
JFK is murdered, and this is the Sunday paper. And this paper was at my parents' house. And there are many things like this.
Wow.
Yeah, there are many things like this that travel through my family. So I'm thinking of like Tia Mouse's All That She Carried, and she has the story of the sack and the family, and the story of like love. And so the way I was raised to cherish artifacts. There's something about the artifacts of our lives that hold both the terror and the testimony of what we have experienced and endured. And so I went back home as well. I went to my grandparents' house. And my grandma called me. My granddad's passed on now. I went to my grandparents' house, and my grandma called me in the back, and she said, I got some stuff for you. So I went back to the back room. Granddaddy closed, his light moved, that maneuver. Then she pulls me over to the shelf. And on the shelf, she opens up a old plastic bag. In the old plastic bag is my granddaddy's journal. And in his journal is like words, numbers, places, money, things, meticulously documented. But then she pulls out another sheet of paper, and it is their marriage license, and it says colored on there. Wow. And I think about all of that. I think about the way I was raised. I think about that in just the beautiful part of that life, that I was raised in the Black rural South, and I had a beautiful childhood. It's a thing to talk about like Black life as if Black life is terrible in and of itself. Right. But I'm reminded of Imani Perry's, the brilliant Imani Perry, and shout out to her for South to America. Get that book if you haven't. Imani writes in the Atlantic, and she says, racism is terrible, Blackness is not.
That's right.
Now, there are terrible things that we do to one another, and there are terrible things that happened in my childhood that I still remember, and terrible things that I had done or that was done to me. But when I look back on my childhood and the way I was raised, whatever I took to Clemson University when I played football, whatever I took to California, whatever I took in marriage, whatever I took in back here to Augusta, Georgia, whatever I took when it came to what I tried to communicate on the page, all of that is in some way, back to using that language of lingering, all of that is some way the lingering of the kind of stories that I want to conjure up, that I want my life to be suffused with. I want it to be suffused with all the ways in which we have created life and built something of meaning. And so much of my journey as a writer, how did I start writing, was back in my childhood. My mother loved books, and she would, she would make us write on them. She would have conversations about them. She would make sure we go visited the places that were in these certain books. And we were talking just yesterday. And my mother at my grandfather's funeral, she said, in reflection on Granddaddy, she was like, "Daddy, I love my daddy." She said, "Daddy, the first book that Daddy ever gave me was a book by Toni Morrison." And yesterday when I talked to my mama, I said, "Mama, I know what book it was." I said, "It was Song of Solomon." And my mama said, "Yes, that was the one. It was."
I love
Song
that
of
book
Solomon.
so much. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so when I think about my journey being a writer and becoming a writer, of course, it took me a while to get there because, so much of the way I was raised, I distanced myself from, and, I destroyed so much in it. I mean, so much in me from it. That
and
when
we'll definitely,
it came,
I have some questions for you in this interview, because you write so authentically and vulnerably and honestly about that process. But it's so clear that the groundedness that you have as a writer today is from those links from your past. Like, it couldn't be
100.
severed, and it's a beautiful foundation that your mother and your parents created for you that is just it's really unbreakable.
Yeah, 100. Well, I would say it can be broken, but can be recovered. Things that are broken can be salvaged and repaired.
That's right.
Things that
I love
are
that.
ultimately destroyed cannot.
Yeah.
We can rebuild on those things and try and pick up the pieces of the ruins. And I think that may be part of it. I think it is, so much of my journey is a part of that. Like, things being broken in me, but finding ways to put it back together again.
Yeah.
My professor sat me in his office one day, and he's a brilliant person, Dr. Greg Elliott. We was talking about this award that he won. Brilliant scholar. He won this award. One day he was moving it, and it fell and shattered on the ground.
Wow.
And he almost threw it away. But then he set this piece of artifact in front of me that day, and it was glued back together with the cracks still showing. And he said that this is a metaphor for so many of our lives. You get praise in one area, things get broken, and you find ways to put it back together again, but somehow the cracks are still showing to remind you of who you were and where you came from. And so much of my journey as a writer is being broken, being cracked, but finding ways through Black literature, through words, through revision, as KSA Lehman talks about, to put those pieces back together again.
That's beautiful. That is such wisdom. Thank you.
Dear Good Ancestors, let's take a short break for a minute. Are you enjoying this episode? Then you should join our book club. The Become a Good Ancestor book club is a place for book-loving changemakers. We are a community of engaged people from around the world who are passionate about social justice, creativity, leadership, healing, liberation, and of course, books. Each month on Patreon, we read and discuss the book from the current month's episode. And at the end of the month, we host an exclusive Q&A event with the author themselves. Our past books and authors include the New York Times bestseller, The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr., Motherhood, on the Choices of Being a Woman by Dr. Pragya Agrawal, The Final Revival of Opal and Nev by Donnie Walton, named a Best Book of 2021 by Barack Obama, and See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love by renowned civil rights leader Valerie Carr. The internet can often be a loud and overwhelming place. There's a lot of information out there, but not always a lot of depth. When you join our book club, you'll become a member of a thoughtful and hopeful corner of the internet. To learn more, click the link in the show notes or visit becomegoodancestor.com/book club. We can't wait to see you there.
Okay, let's talk about your book, Shouting in the Fire. I would love for you to tell our listeners and our book club members about what it's about, and specifically the title. So on page 8, you say, to believe in the better, to believe in your future, to shout in the midst of a country on fire, to stare down the lions, to shake the foundations of the empire, to make meaning in the face of death, to fail, to create, to live, and to love. This is the stuff of hope. So I'm wondering if you could tell us what the book is about, where did this title come from, and who's shouting and what is the fire?
That's good. That's an incredible question. So I think first and foremost, Shouting in the Fire is a nod to just my deep love for James Baldwin and Jasmine Ward. James Baldwin writes The Fire Next Time, and then Jasmine Ward edited the book that featured so many brilliant and beautiful Black writers, contemporary Black writers, entitled The Fire This Time, a New Generation Speaks on Race. There's so many essays in that book that's just absolutely incredible and so beautiful. I mean, there's poetry, there's narrative, there's essay, there's whatever. There's just so much in that book that's just so beautiful. And it's just like James Baldwin book, The Fire Next Time. So much of Shouting in the Fire, the language is about James Baldwin and the ways in which Baldwin has helped me think about my own self. Because The Fire Next Time, if we do a close reading of The Fire Next Time, it is first and foremost a intimate reflection on Black life and Black love and Black humanity. And then it is kind of outward facing, and him kind of preaching to the country, preaching to Black people, preaching to white people, preaching to the failures of this quote unquote democratic experience. But in the first half, which is in reflection on the 100 years since the Emancipation Proclamation, it is this intimate, very intimate conversation between him and his nephew. It's a letter to his nephew, where he talks about if we had not loved, then none of us would have survived. And he tells his nephew that it was intended that you perish, and that whatever people cause you to feel and make you endure is not a testament to your inferiority, but a reflection of their insecurity and fear. Wow. And then he would go on to say, that, we must accept them because they are our brothers. And so, we got to figure out how to live together. But remember, even as you're trying to figure out how to live, realize that you come from a people. You come from somewhere. You come from a people who have taken whatever we have been given in this country or in our experience, and we have made it Black. But then he turns to Letter from a Region in My Mind, and he does this very kind of philosophical, theological, social political reflection on the church, on the country, on the community. And he tries to navigate all of this experience in that last line, that God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, but the fire next time. It is almost as if like he is writing into the future. He is writing into almost like Octavia Butler when she writes for Essence magazine on a few rules for predicting the future. She says that, I didn't create the problems that we are living with right now, but I took the problems of right now and I took the dangers of today and I allowed them to foster for 30 years and become the disasters of tomorrow. And then the student asks her, then what must we do? What can we do? She says, there is no single answer, but you can become an answer if you so choose to be. And so when I think about Shouting in the Fire and its connection to James Baldwin and The Fire Next Time, it is, my homage to the ways in which Baldwin through that book has taught me how to live, love, and accept myself.
Yes.
Because that's the struggle inside of a racist country, and even being a young Black man who is steeped in patriarchy and misogyny and sexism and homophobia and transphobia inside of this experience that teaches us, that socializes and disciples us into those type of frameworks and commitments. And when I think about Baldwin and the way he wants me to be better, Shoutin in the Fire is about that. It is about how I'm not a hero nor a villain, but I'm human. We're human and we're worthy of the deepest love. But that love must be, as Kiese would always say, responsible love. It should be a love that tried to usher us out of our terrible theology, our toxic ways of being together, our harmful ways of seeing ourselves and loving others, and lean us into and help us take on better frameworks, take on better practices, take on better and more healing understandings of our faith and of this country and what we have created. And so Shoutin in the Fire is a homage to that. But Shoutin in the Fire is so much more than that. When I think about the language of fire, oftentimes many people think that language about a fire is about destruction.
Right.
Only kind of viewing Baldwin or Jasmine or even Ta-Nehisi when he writes in Vanity Fair. Yeah, when he writes Between the World and Me, but also he wrote that joint in Vanity Fair called This is the Fire or something like that. And things like that. When people think about the fire, they think only about the ways in which like Black people are harmed and the ways in which we die. And when I think about myself, that is a limitation that I try to lean into and sometimes failed in my own work, that my ideas of the fire oftentimes did communicate just simply the ways in which we die and are harmed. But it's so much more than that. As I've read and reread my book and tried to write more and revise the book and even my own work, I realized that the fire is about the ways in which we live. It's a reflection of the story in the Hebrew Bible. Where the three Hebrew boys dance in the fire. And it was so much about how this world or the political leaders, tried to destroy them. But it also was about that they were in the fire, but they were dancing. They were alive. Right. So to shout in the fire, and even I did this in the book. My book is not just death, harm, failure. It is so much about living in the tension of what it means to live inside places where you are both good and bad. You are both ugly and beautiful to other people. Yeah. Where you hold the tension in your own body. But like to shout is to remember and to live in ways that we are alive and come alive. And so that's what it's about. It's about that. It's about how we are in love and alive, and that we don't have to prove ourselves, but that we are already enough. Whether I'm talking about, going to Clemson University and being Black on white college campus, or when I'm talking about the ways in which I see us die, but I, as a Black writer, am writing about that death with a sensitivity of the limited imaginations about how people speak about Black death voyeuristically. And so they want to exploit our death just for how they can be seen as not racist, how they can be seen as better, how they can be seen as more educated, more this, more that, more this, more that, whatever ways they blame us to harm us, or whatever ways people reduce our lives or our deaths to whatever they can gain. I wrote with a particular sensitivity to trying to upset that narrative in very ordinary and powerful ways. So Shoutin in the Fire is about that, is about looking at us, but also being seen. So you see Danté through the eyes of my wife. You see Danté through the eyes of Michaela. You see Danté through the eyes of a young girl screaming, no justice, no peace. You see Danté through the eyes of his children, through the eyes of his sister, through the eyes of his uncle, through the eyes of his grandmother, through the eyes of his grandfather. And that Danté is not always the person you want to see or want to meet. But then by the time you get to the end, that Danté that you are left with is a person who tried to get better and indeed did get better. And so for me, I guess that's kind of the beginners, I'll talk about that. That's kind of beginners of why. Yeah.
It is powerful. You just said so many nuggets within there that I'm like, I want to go find that and I want to go read that. So I'm gonna capture some of these for our listeners. First of all, James Baldwin's book, The Fire Next Time, and Jessamine Ward's The Fire This Time would be great companion pieces to read alongside Danté's book, because I think that it sounds like it would give you a really great understanding of the lineage from which you are writing from, and the energy and the culture. So those are great books to read alongside. I love I'm a huge Octavia Butler fan, so I love what you said about her answer, that, you can become the answer. And to me, that really speaks to that quest, that journey of being a good ancestor, really seeing ourselves as, I am here, I'm alive, and there are things that I can do, and there are ways that I can live that can leave a legacy that can be an honoring of the people who came before us, and that can be of service to the people who will come after we're gone. I also really love what you said about the title of your book, that, because when we first hear Shoutin' in the Fire, it sounds like an emergency, right? It sounds like some people need to be rescued, right? It sounds like pain, it sounds like death. And that's there because that's the reality of living within the fire that is white supremacy and other systems of oppression. But I also love what you said about that fire can be viewed differently. Fire can be cleansing. Fire can burn down so that the new can come through. And I'm thinking about, with the Shoutin, during the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests, you had the people screaming, no justice, no peace, but you also had people shouting in celebration of Blackness, in celebration of unity. You had these moments of people breaking out into dance or proposing to their loved ones, right? During these protests, like the shouting can look like so many different things. And so many of the Black writers that you've referenced in this conversation really remind us, right, that our resistance doesn't always have to be something that is steeped in pain. Like our resistance is liberation, and it can be joyful. And it's so interesting, Danté, because when I was writing my notes in preparation for this conversation, I actually wrote Dancing in the Fire, and I hadn't realized it until I went back to check my notes, and I'm like, no, that's not the title of it. It's called Shoutin' in the Fire. But I had written it as Dancing in the Fire.
But dancing and shouting is very much synonymous. So when I think about my Pentecostal upbringing, that is, my book is very much the feel of the Black literary tradition of Kiese Layman, Jasmine Ward, Robert Jones, Deisha Filial. I mean, just these brilliant, Sarah Broom, Maurice Carlos Ruffin. I mean, just these brilliant cadre, this brilliant cadre of Black writers. I'm even thinking about Darnell Moore, which my book with No Ashes in the Fire, Darnell's book was so much of so much of a book I went back to again and again and again, just the ways in which Darnell wrote with honesty and vulnerability, in which I was trying to do. But then also the book is very much a reflection of Black Pentecostalism. I mean, there will be places where I did this as a craft, from a craft standpoint, where you have these almost like moments where you're getting lost in the language, the tongues of the text, where this language is at once dramatic but piercing. It reminds you of so much you must remember. Even though you dance and you're moving, you're moving to a certain type of melody, to a certain type of cadence, to a certain type of rhythm. And so the cadence and the drama of the text. So I'm thinking like the way I end the book, where like this last page is just like over again and again and again, reminding you of themes and narratives that came before. And it is almost like a sermon in that sense. It is a sermon without feeling like you're sermonizing somebody else, like you're trying to win them, like you're trying to condemn them. Because Baldwin said, condemnation is easier than wonder. And I want to be the type of person that wanders in around the text. And if that ain't dancing, then I don't know what is. So maybe on the paperback edition or something like that, or the young people's
readers edition.
Yeah, young readers edition. We could talk about dancing a little bit.
I love it. You shared about we talked about being broken, and you talked about your journey from your roots, your upbringing, the real rich cultural blackness that you were raised within. But like with all of us, right, we all go on this hero's journey where we leave the home and we grow up and we test and we try and we try and explore ourselves and form new identities until we. I mean, there's no end, right? The hero's journey, I think, is an ongoing thing. But where you started from to where you are now, the bit in the middle is quite a journey that you went through. Talk to us about that. And I'm particularly, I think two of the stories that will always stay with me in your book are the stories of DJ and the phone call to your mother when you told her that you were going to get baptized again because you felt that it hadn't been done right the first time.
Yeah, 100. So, I ain't gonna lie, Layla, like the more I interview about my book, the less I like talking about that area.
It's crazy. I'm sure.
Like, and it's not even because now we're gonna talk about it. Like, we're gonna talk about it. But yeah, we're gonna talk about it. Trust me. But I'm starting to realize, like, the more and more I like talk about that, like the more I still feel it, and like I feel like.
Tell me more.
So like, even as people, because people see it as a great story, but I feel it as a great wound.
Yes.
And so I still feel
read it. I read it as a wound. I read it as, because do you know why? It's because even though when we write a story, we have to write it in a linear way that makes sense for a reader. The way we live as human beings isn't like that. And we can come back around again and again to old wounds, old narratives, and find, I thought that I dealt with that, but actually it's still there. It's just showing up in this other way now. And the truth of the matter is we still live in a context of white supremacy. So,
100.
Right? There's that trigger, that reminder is always going to be there. So I feel you.
Yeah, and like we write stuff and we give it away, and like sometimes people don't know how to read us. It's like we trying to make sense of it as people, and we did make sense of it, and we wrote about it, and we didn't even write about the whole thing.
Right.
But like what people focus on is like boom, 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 those moments. And I was in an interview the other day where I had to like tell the interviewer, like, yo, let's move on. Like, yo, you're just trying to beat that too much. Like you this feels weird. Like you just going again and again. But all that to say, yes, we're going to talk about it. So long story short, when it Clemson, I'll talk about it through those two stories.
Yes.
When I went to Clemson, I played football at Clemson. I was ended up walking on. So in kind of American football language, that's like, you're good, but then like you didn't get a scholarship by whatever happened. Either they didn't have room, or you just didn't fit. So you go and you don't necessarily try out, but you go on and you kind of work your way up. That's probably the best way to describe it. It's just like you're trying to work your way up. And so that's what I did when I went to Clemson and ended up playing some good football. But the thing is about, young Black athletes that oftentimes when we go into these predominantly white institutions, whether we're athletes or whether we're just Black people in general in these white institutions, we feel that we have to become different people or have to reinvent ourselves in order for us to make it in these spaces. I was listening to Sonia Sanchez talking about Toni Morrison in the Pieces That I Am, and she had this line about reinvention. She says that, when you say that you're going to reinvent yourself, you don't like who you are. She says Toni Morrison wasn't concerned about reinvention. She was concerned about reimagination. Wow. And I think one of the challenges is that, like, when we go into these spaces, we're trying to destroy certain parts of ourselves to bring us like either, just normalcy, just to kind of exist in a different kind of social space without the kind of demands of where we come from, or we trying to assimilate and gain power and privilege in this space that was much different than where we came from, or we just kind of get caught up in the mix. And so, like, for me, I was somebody who kind of got caught up in the mix where, like, I knew where I came from. I was connected with my family. I would always go back home every Sunday because I was playing drums back at my home church. But then little by little, I stopped going home. I started going around white people more and more. And then doing that came with the script that you are exceptional, that you are not like them. You are different. Now, if that's one person in a kind of community of Black people who know ourselves, who love ourselves, who don't destroy ourselves, then that's not really going to cause us any rifts. But if you got multiple people like that coming from the same places and going into the white space, and you kind of like bringing them in the same spot, some clash is going to happen. And that's what happened with me and DJ. He was a young athlete who came in, and he was great, incredible athlete. And even to this day, he's an incredible person. He's an incredible dude, incredible person. But at that moment, instead of trusting him and loving him, especially knowing that we both came from, the gutter, we both came from the places, that people didn't desire. I came from what people call the corridor of shame. He came from one of the most impoverished areas of Florida, that's left behind. That's a migrant town of Black people coming up from Haiti. That's a very agricultural town, much like my town. And we get on these campuses, they give us all this opportunity, give us jerseys, they do this, they do that, they praise us. And we start to believe the press. We believe that we're different, we're special, we're this, we're that. And, we want to be the only Black person at the top. And instead of realizing that there can be multiple of us at the top, I distrusted him and, destroyed myself in the process. And so when he did me wrong, I write that this probably was the first time that I think I really hated somebody that was Black, where like, I utilized the language that white people used against us, against him, where, like, for me, he was a thug. He was wayward. I was the good one, and he was the bad one. So he was the bad Black person. And therefore, I used that language as a weapon against him. And I didn't realize that in doing that, that would put me on a journey of utilizing my Blackness as a weapon again and again and again and again, not as a weapon to dismantle white supremacy, but to give it power. And so I started to begin to identify with Black people when it was about things that were wrong with us. I didn't identify with Black people when it was things that was beautiful and worth celebrating about us. And that's kind of a test of like anti-Blackness. Whenever we young, when we Black people want to be the only Black person in the room, or whenever we only identify with Black people, whenever it's something bad and things like that, that's anti-Blackness. We only think that Blackness is something to be used rather than something to be loved and embraced and lived in. And so then fast forward years later, I'm in the white church. Me and my wife, Jasmine, we're married and we're in California at this time. And then I called my mama, and I'm convinced at this moment, I done read white theology. I done read their books. I've been discipled by them. I done been in their church culture for a while now, and I was socialized differently. So I wasn't like no Pentecostal preacher anymore. I still had, my charisma and things like that. But so much of who I was a reflection of that space that I was in. And I called my mom, and I'm like, yo, like, I'm getting baptized again. And my mama lost it. And I didn't even realize, that so much of white supremacy and being Black and white space is about doing things to Black people and not even being concerned about how much it hurts. And that's probably what makes me so sad about those various moments, is that, like, when it came to my wife and Michaela telling me, like, yo, you don't have a damn thing to offer Black people. And then I go home and tell this to my wife, and she was like, yo, like, you've been listening, you always listen to other people when I've been telling you this the whole time. It's like, that white praise and white celebration and that white affirmation, like, turned me into somebody that was not just toxic, but dangerous. Somebody who was close enough to Black people to subvert us and to harm us. And I think so much of my journey in that moment and in those moments, and even looking back at it right now, so much of my change meant dealing with that person, dealing with Danté in that moment.
That's right.
And being courageous enough to face myself and to tell myself, you are not right. You are wrong. People are right about you. You are this person. And either you stay the same and lose the people who matter most, or change and lose the people who only want you around because of what you give to them.
That's right.
And I chose the latter. I chose that courageous, hard, messy, terrifying process of changing.
I'm so glad you did. And thank you so much for sharing this and for writing it. And I really honor you and thank you for, I know when you said this, I'm kind of tired of talking about this. I get it. Like, I hear it. And at the same time, I think there are so many Black people and people of color and people in marginalized identities who need to hear this, because this is something that we do to ourselves, and we don't even know that we're doing it. We don't even know that we're destroying our very essence by participating in these systems and these dynamics. And so the kind of having the courage to listen first, right? Because before we go and do the work within, we have to actually sit with ourselves. And like you said, sit with yourself and look in the mirror and be like, no, I am wrong, right? And the way that I'm behaving towards myself and towards my people and the people who love me isn't right. And I need to deal with that. It's such a huge undertaking, but it's so important. And what I so appreciate and respect about you, Danté, is that comes through in the person that you are today. The work that you did and continue to do comes through in the work that you did today. I grabbed this post that you shared recently on Instagram. I mean, I always want to just share everything that you write, because I'm like, and I hear it in your voice as well when I'm reading it.
Yeah.
I'm reading it in your voice in my head.
Yeah.
But you said, Black life is not about white racism, white apathy, or limited white imaginations. Our life is about our living, moving, and having our being in what Kevin Kwashi calls the Black world. A world where we are complex, creative, fail, love, grow old, grow up, and get better. I love this so much. Facts on facts. I really want to encourage folks to buy the book. I now have it in both the hardcover, and I recently downloaded it on audiobook because I wanted to hear it as well.
Yo, I think the Audible is way better than the regular book. I ain't gonna lie.
Because you have this quality and this voice, right?
Yeah.
So,
and I changed some things too, though. So there were moments where where I'm reading the manuscript and I'm telling the producer, I was like, nah, I don't like that. I'm gonna kind of change that. So it's
Right.
we stay closest to the manuscript as possible. But like there were parts where where I changed the language, because like at that moment, like you got so much distance between you and the manuscript at that time.
That's right. That's right.
And you go back and it's like you reading it again. You're having to read the whole thing,
Right.
again for the
You're like,
whatever
I wish
time.
I hadn't read it like that. I wish I had said it differently.
100. But then like, I think the part I most enjoyed about the audiobook was that like when I got to the acknowledgments, there was so many people during that moment when I wrote the acknowledgement, like that I'm like, damn, like there was so many of y'all that made me who I was, that I want to say your name. So I mean, I start like dropping names that's not even in the acknowledgement. I was like, I was dropping all types of names, and then at that moment, I had become friends with people that weren't friends in the past when I finished it. And I think the audiobook is just the best thing. And I felt
everyone
that, like,
should get the audiobook, get the book.
Yeah, you should. I ain't gonna lie. You should get the audiobook. Definitely get the audiobook.
And if you want to discover more about the book and read it in community, discuss it with other people who are also book lovers and lifelong learners and people who are committed to healing and liberation, and particularly Black liberation when we're talking about this book, but also just human dignity, right? And humanity. Join us in the Become a Good Ancestor book club, because we will be reading this book this month, and we will get to have another conversation with Danté, this time privately, where our members will have read your book and they will get to ask you their own questions. So I really want to encourage folks to join us for that. As we close up, I'm gonna ask you two questions, and we're gonna try and keep them as tight as possible. What do you hope people will take away from this book? Like, what is you talk so much about the books and the authors who've had this huge impact on you and how you see yourself. What do you hope this book, your book, will have, the impact that it will have on people?
Yeah, I hope number one, that people like notice that I'm a part of a tradition. Like I want, when people put my book on the shelf, like I want it by like Heavy, or Men We Reap, or Toni Morrison, or Tony K. Bombard, or whatever.
The Prophets.
Like I wanted a part.
Yes.
Yeah, the Prophets. Like I wanted in those type of books, like, I want to be a part of that type of tradition of writing. So that's kind of the first thing. I think the second thing I want people to walk away from is like that we actually change the conditions that Black people live in. Like we only have to write these books because our lives are still dealing with whatever we have to go through in this country.
That's right.
We write these stories because this was how we live. And I hope that when people finish my book, I hope by the time you finish, you got some books to put in your library. But I also hope that like once you finish, like you think differently, like you change and things like that. And I know that's a tall order. And for me, like some people criticize my book for saying like I didn't offer enough answers. And I'm like, okay, cool. I mean, if you want to read it that way, then that's fine. Right. You can read it whatever way you want. But like my thing wasn't really to offer answers to questions that people have. My thing was to invite people into a certain type of experience. Like The Fire Next Time is not answering questions.
That's right.
Like Heavy ain't answering questions. Like Beloved Song of Solomon ain't answering questions. The Prophets ain't answering questions. They're so in love with our Black stories that they're inviting you into worlds live in, to dance in, and to explore. And that's what I want. I want people to change their direction and live and explore the Black world. And that's probably my two biggest hopes.
I love that. And I will say with your book and with your Instagram page, I feel like I'm in the Black world when I'm in your words. That is the 100% the tradition that you're in, and it is you so mindfully and intentionally create and nourish and sustain us in that world. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our final question: what does becoming a good ancestor mean to you?
Easy. Give those who come after us a better world than was given to us. James Baldwin, in Search of a Majority, at the end of In Search of a Majority is writing about, the ways in which we live in the world. And he says, I don't even have to find it. I pulled out the book to make sure I said it right. He says that the world is before you. You need not take it or leave it the same way you found it when you came in. And I think for me, that's it. You need not take the world and leave it the same way you found it when you came in. I mean, there's so much, there's so much that's wrong with this world. But there's so many ways people have made it better. And I want to lean into what we have been given to make ourselves better, to make this world better. And I want us to make that better, that inheritance. I want us to make that inheritance better and give it to the next generation better than we found it. So, yeah.
That is beautiful, Danté. Thank you so much. Thank you for your work, for your book, for your writings, and for this incredible conversation. I can't wait to be in conversation with you again after we've read this in the book club. But I just want to say I appreciate you, and your words, your book is a form of nourishment for me and a form of remembrance of who I am and what it is that I'm here to do. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me on. And I do this at the end of every interview. To the many people who are going to be tapping into this podcast and who have been continuing to support, especially in the pandemic, I do want to thank you. We're in crucial moments continually where we have to figure out how to create community the best way we can. So many people are holding things and going through things. So, when you show up and you support and you engage, you share, you build with one another, that actually does matter. And I do want to say to each of you, I'm very proud of you for the way you've been living these last few years. We've had a lot, we've all been going through, but I'm very proud of you. And I want to encourage you to keep on doing that and do a little bit more in 2022. So, yeah.
Thank you, Danté. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you've enjoyed learning about today's author and their incredible work. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and leave us some love with a rating and review. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. And of course, don't forget to buy the book we talked about today. We're on a mission to center and celebrate BIPOC authors, and you can help us do that by sharing this episode and the book. You can join us in our book club to dive deeper into today's book. Visit becomegoodancestor.com/book club to find out more. For more inspiration and learning, you can find us at becomegoodancestor.com and become_a_good_ancestor on Instagram. Thank you for being on the journey with us as we strive to become good ancestors, in honor of those who have come before us and in service to those who will come after we are gone.